Thank you very much, and welcome to Moments of Clarity. My name is Tiffany Werhner, licensed mental health counselor, and your host for the next hour. Today, we're starting a little later than usual, and thanks, Kristen, for accommodating that. I have some special guests in the studio from the Mental Health Rights Organization, and I'll let you introduce yourselves, if that's okay. I know we have Lori here, and Lori and I contacted and spoke with each other about, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I know that you funded the Mental Health Rights Organization, and you're passionate about quite a few things, and.
Yeah, Tiffany, I'll introduce myself. My name is Lori Anspach, and I'm the Director of Mental Health Rights Advocacy. And we're an advocacy nonprofit that helps Floridians to understand their rights in regards to mental health. And we offer a hotline. We also do a lot of in-depth research, and we work with Mr. Andrew Thibault, who's here with us today.
Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Tiffany, for having us on. So I'm Andrew Thibault. I'm co-founder of a group called Parents Against Pharmaceutical Abuse, or PAPA for short. Our website is pharmabuse.com, and we also have a website called murdermeds.com.
Murder meds. Wow, that's pretty to the point.
Yeah, I imagine that's something we're going to talk about today.
Mm-hmm.
It's a somber day. Yesterday, French authorities released the final crash investigation report relating to Germanwings Flight 9525, wherein it was detailed that the co-pilot Andreas Lubitz deliberately crashed an Airbus 320 into the French Alps, taking his own life and the life of 149 other people. According to the French authorities, there were 3 drugs that were detected in the remains of Mr. Lubitz. One is called citalopram, which is
Celexa. Right.
Correct. Marketed in the U.S. as Celexa, as well as Lexapro. Escitalopram oxalate is Lexapro, which he was prescribed. The other drug was another antidepressant called mirtazapine, and it's marketed in the U.S. as Remeron. Mm-hmm. And the third drug they detected is called zopiclone, which itself isn't commercially available in the U.S., but its isomer, a chemically related molecule called S-zopiclone is, and that's marketed in the U.S. as Lunesta. We see the butterfly commercials on television.
Right. It's the a sleep aid, correct?
Right. Correct. And records also showed that Mr. Lubitz was prescribed Zolpidem, which is marketed as Ambien, in the United States, as well as he was taking the drug lorazepam, which is marketed as Ativan. So he was
while flying.
Well, they detected it in his remains, so he had these.
I can tell you, Ambien's one monster thing. I've been prescribed that too. It's a sleep aid, right? And if you miss that 30-minute window, and a lot of my clients have even been prescribed that as well. And if you miss that window to fall asleep, then people have been known to do all
crazy
sorts
things.
of stuff.
You know, the warning labels warn of things like somnambulism, which is sleepwalking, parasomnia, which is acting out sometimes violently in your sleep, as well as sleep driving has even been reported. So, it should be noted that the zopiclone is a central nervous system depressant, right? So I guess the question is that something that you really want to give to somebody who apparently was suffering from depression because he was prescribed 2 other antidepressants? And what this really reveals is a dangerous trend of polypharmacy, or these drug cocktails which have never been tested to see whether they can be safely administered together. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we just published, PAPA just published on our website an analysis of the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System reports, which we'll get into here, I imagine, in a moment. And this particular cocktail of antidepressants plus hypnotic sedatives leads the list of top homicidal drug cocktails that have been reported to the FDA. So oftentimes these drugs have interactions together, and consumers need to be aware of that, but they're not always warned of it.
And they've been doing a lot of DNA and genetic testing to see if there's allergic reactions to certain medications. It's been more common to send a patient out for allergic DNA and genetic findings before prescribing them psychotropic meds, especially a combination or whatnot, because I've seen.
That's correct. In particular, there's an enzyme known as CYP450 that's been implicated in a lot of these tragedies. In fact, I was on a radio talk show late last month where one of the guests that called in had that particular genetic problem that prevents him from properly metabolizing the drugs. And he was on the drug Paxil, or paroxetine, a commonly prescribed antidepressant, and he killed his son. He was found not criminally responsible. So to give some more context, our group, Parents Against Pharmaceutical Abuse, our purpose is really to counter the trend of overdiagnosis and overmedication of children for psychiatric disorders. You know, just on March 10th, the Journal of Pediatrics published a Taiwanese study in which they said that the birth month of children was a strong determinant of whether they would be diagnosed, for instance, with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Which months are those?
Well, August was the highest month, and the reason is that August 31st is the cutoff for eligibility for kindergarten in Taiwan. So essentially, kids were 65% more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD if they were born in the month of August than kids who weren't. And they were 75% more likely to be medicated with stimulant medications. So in effect, we are diagnosing immaturity, and we're drugging kids with a Schedule II stimulant. In many cases in the United States, we have 4.4 million children who are on these stimulant medications. Now, this is the same class of drugs that the DEA has designated for methamphetamine and cocaine. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I initially went looking at a system that's been created at the FDA called MedWatch, also referred to as the Adverse Event Reporting System. And to kind of understand the modern drug approval process, it might be helpful to give some historic context. Back in 1955, there was a Harvard-educated doctor by the name of Henry K. Beecher. He published a seminal paper called The Powerful Placebo, in which he coined the phrase that we've all heard, the placebo effect. And what he found was that there was a significant number of patients who would respond to a sugar pill. So they would respond positively to treatment with a sugar pill. And what he recommended was testing. We refer to it today as an RCT, or randomized controlled trial, also referred to as a double-blind placebo-controlled trial,
sure,
in which you have half of the test subjects on the drug and half that aren't.
But they think they're all on.
Correct. It's blinded, and so
right,
neither the investigator or doctor or the patient ideally is supposed to know whether they're on the medication or on the placebo, and then you unblind the trial at the end and see if the drug is effective or not. So against that backdrop, in 1961, there was a drug scare, a drug called thalidomide, which, by the way, wasn't approved in this country, but it was very commonly used in Europe. About 1 in 7 people used it. It was the first non-barbiturate sedative. And it started creating some horrible side effects. So after this scare, there was a senator by the name of Kefauver and a congressman by the name of Harris who helped to pass what are now known as the Kefauver-Harris Amendments to the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And that really codified Beecher's recommendations. So for the first time, the pharmaceutical companies had to prove that the drugs were both safe and effective. And so after those protections were put into place in the 1960s, only about a third of all drugs that were that the pharmaceutical companies submitted a new drug application, or NDA, for were approved. So if you fast forward to 1992, another law was passed. It was called PDUFA, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. And there were really two goals for that law. One was to speed innovative drugs to market. And the second was to get the pharmaceutical companies to pay for the FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research to do the safety initial pre-marketing evaluation of the drugs. And so today, the FDA is paid $2.3 million per NDA or new drug application. And in effect has become a drug approval mill, where now the rate of approval for drugs submitted to the FDA is between 96 and 97% of the drugs. So to mitigate the essentially the short circuiting of and the short changing of this pre-marketing evaluation process, they started this system called MedWatch. And it really is, it's called post-marketing surveillance. So essentially what's happening is drugs are being approved based on very limited trials that may last between 4 and 6 weeks and only have perhaps 50 or 100 trial subjects. Then those drugs that aren't properly tested are unleashed on the American population. And this system called MedWatch is, in theory, meant to be kind of like a canary in the coal mine. So if you start having canaries dropping, in theory, then the FDA's Office of Drug Safety would take another look at the drug. There was a drug called Vioxx that was a painkiller that the FDA approved, and a medical reviewer by the name of Dr. David Graham was assigned to study that drug after there were reports of heart attacks. There were 130,000 heart attacks that were reported as a result of this drug. And Dr. Graham estimated that there were about 40,000 people that died on the drug.
Are they doing the administered, like, regular, I guess, pre-tests, like the EKG and testing to make sure the heart's strong enough for a stimulant or anything like that? Or has that been weighed in with the testing and the statistics that they were pre-tested to make sure that they were, good contestants, so to speak, for that substance and for that drug? You wouldn't put someone on a stimulant if they have like heart condition or hypertension or anything like that without testing to make sure that their heart is up to par, so to speak,
Yeah, so in this case, it wasn't a stimulant, but it was a painkiller. But it's a very good question, Tiffany, because I think the American public sometimes thinks that the FDA tests these products. And you raise a very interesting question, because the FDA doesn't test the products. The pharmaceutical companies are responsible for the clinical trial design. And oftentimes, they design the trial with what's known as an enriched clinical design that favors the pharmaceutical companies. So for instance, they will try to eliminate what are called placebo responders. So if you respond to placebo, they'll eliminate you. They won't randomize you into the trial. Likewise, they will not randomize people who are called drug non-responders. So they'll have an open label phase where they'll test the drug on you, and if it doesn't work, then you're shown the door.
Which sucks. Well, it just sucks because what you're saying is even if it's not a stimulant, it's a painkiller, right? And so on the streets, there's all these opiate addicts that are coming to counseling to get approval for Suboxone or methadone or whatnot, because insurances are tired of paying for the continuation of, even though they're trying to get off of the drug, they're, paying for the continuation of a maintenance program so that they're not detoxing or withdrawing, and they can't seem to kick it, so to speak. And so then there's other pharmaceutical drugs that they're coming out that you're saying like it's like a painkiller instead of a stimulant. Either way, it would be helpful to do a case study of if they've had a history of addiction in their family, even though it's only a predisposition. It's not a fact that it's genetically disposed. It's predisposition, that it's not a fact. It's a genetic thing that's passed down. But the addictive personality has a lot to, those tests should be run, if anything, because with the painkillers, it went from, back in a decade ago, I guess it was like the pill mill thing went crazy with the Oxycontin, Roxy's, everything. Then it went to Dilantin. and then I don't know, you just keep going. Then they're like just finding heroin off the streets because Dilaudid, that's what it was.
Well, it's a terrible problem.
Now there's another one, like in the Percocet, and it's just like whatever they can get their hands on, and they're all intravenously using it. But
well, you're absolutely correct, Tiffany. It's a terrible problem, and in fact, with respect to the kids, which is our primary focus, the FDA has a pediatric advisory committee meeting, I believe it's on April 12th of this year, in Bethesda, Maryland, in which they're going to be discussing one of these painkillers, one of these opiates, for children. So this Dr. David Graham, he was subpoenaed by the Senate, by Congress.
For what cause? Like a painkiller because they broke a leg, or like?
Well, that's the thing. A lot of times the indications for these drugs are very narrowly defined, but the FDA knows very well that these drugs will be prescribed off-label. So this is a very dangerous trend, particularly with
define
the opiates.
Off-label. What do you mean?
Off-label, like for instance, there are a lot of kids who are prescribed here in this state the antidepressant Lexapro. Well, Lexapro is not approved for children under 12 years old. But if you look at the AHCA, the Administration for the Agency for Healthcare Administration, which administers Medicaid and Medicare here in the state of Florida, their recommendations, they have Lexapro on the preferred drugs list from 6 years old. And the reason for that is they put a bid out, and the University of South Florida won the bid. And it was a $7 million bid to give prescribing recommendations to AHCA. And now the University of South Florida has received $500,000 roughly from Forest Labs, which is now Actavis, to study another one of their psychoactive drugs. And then coincidentally, they recommend this drug. And it says specifically on the schedule for children 6 years or older. So off-label, for instance, there was a study done by a psychiatrist by the name of Harold Kaplowitz in New York City, and what he found was that about a third of children in foster care programs who are diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are being prescribed second-generation antipsychotics off-label to treat ADHD. So it's never been tested. In fact, there's a new drug called Rexulti, which is brexpiprazole, which which for all intents and purposes is a rebranding of a drug called Abilify or
this is a little bit more hardcore than Lexapro, though.
Yeah, and this is being prescribed off-label.
Lexapro is like an anti-anxiety, antidepressant kind of, but
correct.
And then Abilify is a huge mood stabilizer. It's a whole different category.
Yeah, and I just want to.
But you asked me what is off-label, and so that's how the drugs are being used off-label. Is that the FDA approves the drug for certain indication, and then once it's approved, there's no law that prevents a doctor from prescribing it off-label. So not for the indication that it's intended for. And so you have antipsychotics being prescribed. You have.
So what if you had a 10-year-old that was very successful on Lexapro?
So I'd like to
interject.
So I'm not here.
I'm not here as a medical professional. Yeah. I'm just here to tell you what's in the Food and Drug Administration Adverse Event Reporting System and what's on the label. The label actually says it's a black box warning, and it's the strongest possible warning that says that based on an FDA study, and this was performed by a Dr. Andrew Mossholder, who's an epidemiologist and medical reviewer within the Office of Drug Safety within the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. He found that children, based on the clinical trials, were 90% more likely to think about suicide or attempt to commit suicide on the drug versus placebo. So now there's a big black box warning on it, and doctors are discouraged. That's a personal decision between a parent and the doctor, but what we're trying to do is get this information out there to parents so that they can make informed decisions. And this information that we're talking about that we found within the adverse event reporting system has only now been released publicly. In fact, there's no doctors that have reviewed this information outside of the FDA.
What were you going to say, Lori? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Tiffany. I wanted to interject just for the listeners. For the many years I've been
on... Lori, let's introduce yourself as well. And we found each other. You found me. And this is not the first or only time that you'll be on the show. But you've been on WTAM before.
Yeah, I've been on radio.
And we found each other, and I was like, "This is the local phone number." And they didn't even know that you were around the corner. So welcome to Moments of Clarity.
Much. Yeah, thanks, Tiffany.
And if anybody has anything that you would like to say, please call in. It's toll free, 866-826-1340. Locally, we have 727-441-3000. And you can also watch and listen to us live, tantalk1340.com, or go to mocwithtiffany.com and hit click here. It's pretty self-explanatory. And anyway, we have the Mental Health Rights Organization and the local chapter, so to speak, and they're looking out for the better good of everybody, and like making sure that we know our rights as parents and as medical practitioners and as consumers and everything. And so I think it's important that you guys are here, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Tiffany. What I wanted to bring into the conversation is a little bit of an experience I've had with people who call in on the hotline, like real life examples, because a hotline by nature is an emergency line. And these are parents or individuals that have had situations involving mental health symptoms, diagnoses, and it's hit an emergency point. So many of the things that we've talked about so far come up on the hotline in real life. So for 20 years, I've taken these calls and talked on the radio across the country about this subject. And I think one of the most important things that we've touched on is people in the public do not get full information. They're trying so hard to help themselves, their children, their grandmother, their mother, whomever it is who's experiencing mental health symptoms or behavior. And unfortunately, when they go to a doctor, they are not given full information. That is a lot of what we've talked about today.
We're like in a sense of urgency. We want help. As a parent, we want answers. We want to know, how do I save my child? How do I help my child? They're, saying things that, depression, like you're saying, so suicidal thoughts, anything like that. And so at that point, a mother would be going to anyone and taking any advice given, because I'm a mother myself. I would want to find out any way to save my child and help their lives be better.
Yeah, it's really scary. It's real life, and it's really scary. So the thing I've found over the years, Tiffany, is that when the individual, the parent, gets just the basic facts, they are intelligent enough to make a conclusion, a decision, an informed decision as to whether the medications, the diagnosis are really true and factual versus, does my child need a thorough medical exam? Like, for instance, that what we've been talking about in terms of the FDA warnings on the drugs, on the mental health drugs. For those that are listening, you may not have gotten the package insert, which lists the full FDA warnings on these medications. And Mr. Thibault was talking about the clinical trials, where those warnings are derived from. And he'll continue to give you a bit more information on that. In real life terms, these medications, and you even see it on the TV commercials, carry warnings of mania, psychosis, delusions, hallucinations, paranoia, suicidal thinking, homicidal thinking, and as you mentioned earlier, Tiffany,
those are the notorious commercials where it's like, they kick their little sand and they're like walking along the beach with a stick, and like someone kicks a rock and they're like
with a lab retriever.
And then they're like, I feel, you suffered from depression, and then they're gazing off into the water, and then like side effects may include stomach pain, abdominal bleeding, whatever.
So
and then on top of that, and if I'm feeding in, but the diagnosis, especially for children, just like Andrew was saying before, we could be diagnosing immaturity for something, and but there very well could be ADHD and poor functioning, which could kill a child's self-esteem or not allow them to reach their potential if they did not have the ability to have extra time in classes, or the ability to focus, or anything like. There are times where I think medication is like mandatory. There's also times I think that therapy and one-on-one attention is just all they need. And I'm not an advocate for either or. I would rather therapy first and then figure out if like medication would be the last resort. And that's just me as a parent. That's my own. I would bring in the tutors and the entourage of everything except, and then medication last resort if it's proven that that's something that needs to be said. But they can be misdiagnosed. ADHD and bipolar are hand in hand. It could be.
Well, part of the reason for that, Tiffany, is the medication. The medication actually has a warning about bipolar. So when you give a child a stimulant drug, that can
if they're
cause
bipolar,
mania.
it makes them worse.
It's going to give them mania, and so they get diagnosed with bipolar. But I was in your same position, right? So I was faced with a decision whether or not to medicate my child, and I went looking for information, and unfortunately, there's just not enough information out there, and that's how I stumbled on this MedWatch or adverse event reporting system. And so it's not really plainly spelled out for parents. This data is literally millions of reports that are in these obscure computer files. They're not encrypted, but they might as well be because they're hieroglyphics for most people. But I happen to be in the IT industry as a profession, so I normalized this data into a relational database, and I ran some reports on it. And what I found was shocking, Tiffany. There were nearly 2,000 children who've died on this medication. Now, what's even more disturbing is that the Department of Health and Human Services has testified in a congressional hearing that they estimate that the MedWatch system only represents between 1% and 10% of the total number of cases, right? And that's because the system is entirely voluntary. So there may be upwards of 2,000 to 200,000 children who have died on the medication. And that was very shocking.
But are the people successful reporting this, or just the ones that were unsuccessful reporting?
I'll give you an idea. So
we have to take a commercial break.
Okay,
I'm getting that
Maybe
signal.
we can hit this after the break.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Chris, if we can just go through the commercial break whenever you're ready and pay a tribute to our sponsors, and then we'll come back and we'll get back with Andrew and Lori from the Mental Health Rights Organization. If anybody has anything they'd like to ask them, feel free to call in toll free 866-826-1340, and we'll be right back with Moments of Clarity. And thank you for waiting. We got some great sponsors on our side, and welcome back to Moments of Clarity. Today should be Cali Tacos Monday March Madness Monday Taco Monday on Moments of Clarity. Go ahead.
What?
Exactly. What? Where are our tacos from Cali Tacos? I thought you were ordering them ahead of time.
You can't like dub this March Monday Moments Madness Taco Day, whatever you want to call it, if we're not actually going to have tacos.
Well, we're supposed to.
Oh, well, what happened?
I know. We'll talk about this after the show, Chris. I figured I annoy Chris Dunn. He's done a great job, and I'm lucky to have him behind the scenes. He pulls things together even when I'm running a little bit behind. And it's also being filmed by Innovative Films by Chris Lato. This happens to be a world-renowned film director. He's just between films. You have a movie coming out, right? Yep. In April that you'll start filming.
Super.
So if you want a copy of this, it's only $2,500 each. Sounds good, Chris.
Check, PayPal,
Check, PayPal, Firstborn, whichever. Anyway, no, as this is we're very lucky to have the sponsors and the support to not only bring live radio and our cause up to the next level, but also, I don't know, show them what we got. And anyone listening, Innovative Films, the commercial was just on, and if you need any more information, you go to mocwithtiffany.com, and you can also hire Chris Lato for any filming needs. He does a lot of videos, rap videos, commercials, bank commercials, things like that.
Any relation to Jared?
No, I wish. Or maybe, who knows? I don't know.
Which Jared? Just saying. Anyway, so we're coming back, and we were going to follow back with when we got back for a second.
Yeah, just before the break, Tiffany, we were talking about the MedWatch system, and I had identified about 1,900 children who had died on the medication, and that was shocking, especially given the fact that this is a voluntary system. And to put it into scale, our fledgling group here of parents, we have about 50 members. 3 of our parents have experienced the ultimate tragic loss. Their children have died on the medication. None of those 3 children have reported these fatalities to MedWatch. So there are a lot of fatalities that go unreported. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to understand more about the circumstances under which these children died. And so there's a separate table within the FDA data that describes drug reactions. So I ran a report for that. And there were some things that, while tragic, aren't surprising. Things like cardiac arrest, respiratory arrest, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, toxic epidermal necrolysis, neuroleptic malignant syndrome, homicide. Wait, what? And then I saw it again, murder, as a side effect? And so the light bulb went off, and I ran the report again, and sure enough, there were hundreds of cases of homicides associated with the medication. So this may be one of the more controversial things that we've brought into the light, but we've now published this the data that we've been able to recover.
This could be a show all on its own.
Right, on murdermeds.com. And so we requested this information of the FDA, and they wouldn't provide it. So after months of foot dragging.
I wonder why.
Well, it's not exactly flattering for the agency.
No.
And so I ended up suing the FDA, and that litigation is still pending. And what we do have on the website is what they've
which website is that?
That's murdermeds.com.
Murdermeds.com.
Mm-hmm. And that's what they've provided so far. But one of the things that's striking is that a lot of these mass shooters and notorious killers that we hear about, it turns out that they were on medications approved by the FDA that had some pretty scary warning labels.
Such as?
Well, so for instance, the Aurora Theater shooter, James Holmes.
Oh my gosh.
He was taking Zoloft and Klonopin. Okay, the FSU shooter here in Tallahassee on November 20th, 2014.
That guy just
an attorney by the name of Myron Deshawn May was on Vyvanse, which is the most commonly prescribed drug for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
It's one of them.
Wellbutrin.
It's up there with Adderall, but yeah, it could be misconstrued with like crystal meth. It's like
Right, you're absolutely right, Tiffany. They did a study. In fact, Dr. Andrew Mossholder, who also did the medical review for the antidepressants that led to the black box warning, he did a study that was published back in March of 2006, in which he found that all of the stimulants on the market today for ADHD cause hallucinations, psychosis, and mania. And this was,
well, sure, it's a stimulant. If you're not really ADHD, it's speed.
Well, there's some controversy about that. I would argue it's speed no matter what. Now, there are clinical trials. I mentioned how it's not the FDA that tests the drugs. It's the pharmaceutical companies and companies that they hire to test the drugs. So if you take a drug like orosmethylphenidate, which is known as Concerta, it's basically a rebranded Ritalin with a long release mechanism. You look at the trial design, and it's what they call an enriched trial design. And Dr. Peter Goethe out of the University of Copenhagen says that is just designed to enrich the drug companies. So what they did in this particular stimulant trial was they started out with 200 individuals. So all things being equal, you'd think that, 100 kids went on the drug and 100 kids didn't. Well, that's not what happened. They started with what's called an open label phase. So every child is on the medication. And they started them on 24 milligrams, and then they would titrate up every week. If you responded to 24, well, that's the dose that you would remain on.
Concerta?
Talking about Concerta.
Okay.
a.k.a. Oros methylphenidate.
Oh, right.
Ortho-McNeil, which is now owned by Janssen Pharmaceuticals, and Johnson & Johnson. And so each week they would titrate up until they reached the maximum dosage of 72 milligrams. If you did not respond to the drug at 72 milligrams, then you were shown the door. So there were like 46, if memory serves, 46 children who started on the medication that were not randomized into the trial because the drug didn't work. Now keep in mind, the whole Kefauver-Harris amendment, the purpose of it was to find out whether the drug was efficacious or not, both safe and effective. So if the drug's not effective for a large portion of the children, then they just aren't randomized into the trial. Then there were another 16 kids that dropped out that were in the drug group. 14 of those dropped out for lack of efficacy. And so what was really shocking is
There's like 6 drugs out there for ADHD that if one doesn't work, the other one's usually...
Well, they're all pretty much the same, with the exception of guanfacine and clonidine, which are Intuitive,
Metadate and Ritalin and Concerta.
They're all
and
the same.
Strattera is not a stimulant.
Strattera is, in fact, it's an SNRI, a selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. In fact, it was slated to be Lilly's blockbuster antidepressant until Prozac took off.
And
so
Strattera has got more dangerous side effects than Adderall or Ritalin, though.
Well, there are some cases. In fact, if you look on murder meds related to some homicide
Strattera actually has more of the negative side effects I've heard of, and it's not a stimulant.
Well, the other drugs that you mentioned, methylene, Metadate, Focalin, Quilivant, Daytrana, Quilichu, Ritalin, Concerta, those are all methylphenidate drugs. Emphasis on methylphenidate, right? So it's meth. And then the other drugs, Adderall, Dexedrine, and Vyvanse, Vecchio, these are amphetamine-based drugs. If you combine those together, it's methamphetamine. And in fact, there is a drug called Digoxin, which is approved for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, that is methamphetamine. So these drugs all act similarly on the brain to cocaine.
There's another one that people are using that is supposed to stop narcolepsy. It's a very strong
Provigil.
Right, Provigil. That's what it is. And they're trying to use that, like some
also
of the
Nuvigil.
And it's not about the doctors. Like when I say they, I'm talking about more the clients that are the addicts coming in and trying to get that. Because it's probably the strongest one, I'm assuming.
Well, that's a very good point, because it's prescribed for narcolepsy, but it is being used to treat attention deficit hyperactivity
No, they go
disorder.
in and say they have narcolepsy.
When Dr. Mossholder did his review, he did include Provigil in that study. So, and based on during the Pediatric Advisory Committee presentation that Dr. Mossholder and his team did, they cited a Canadian study in which 90 children were provided methylphenidate. 9 of those children had psychotic side effects as a result. So actually it was between 6 and 9 children. I think it was actually 6. I want to correct myself. So 6% is still a lot. If you think about 4.4 million children, if 6% of those children are going to have these type of psychotic side effects, that's going to lead to this polypharmacy, this phenomenon that we were talking about, where people are put on multiple drugs, which kind of leads us back to where we started, which is this pilot who was put on multiple drugs, and we see the tragic consequences. So certainly we need to pay more attention to what we're putting in our bodies, and consumers need to have more accurate information. And I would call on the Food and Drug Administration to release the rest of the data that they're withholding regarding these tragedies, so that experts can study this and we can protect consumers.
We have 5 minutes left, and I wanted to touch base on what we talked about on the phone too. So we're gonna have to schedule another visit if that's okay, and especially with the teacher and the 504, like you know what I'm talking about, Lori,
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
And it doesn't look like we can really get into that. And I apologize, we got rushed this morning and everything. But I'd like to close up with what we're talking about here, and then schedule another visit if that's okay.
Yes, sounds good.
But that's the 4.6 million that you're testing. Like what group of children, what country,
No, that's just the United States. There's 4.4 million children in this country that are on stimulant drugs for ADHD.
And out of those, and then of course the murder meds, that's a whole different subject. But that a lot of them, and like the James Holmes thing, that just kind of, that just was just, in my opinion, it didn't need to happen. And he was seeing a psychiatrist. He was trying to reach out. Even he was clinically, like, obviously insane, and reaching out and sending notes to his therapist. And it's not her fault at all, in my opinion, that she didn't check her mail in time, because some of us just don't. Especially if you have office mail, home mail, like all sorts of things. But that was just.
Yeah,
these awful. It was an awful tragedy that possibly could have been stopped,
So the topic that we're talking about is pretty controversial, right? It brings up some pretty strong feelings in people, and you could debate whether there is a causal role that these medications play. Certainly, many of the perpetrators turn out to toxicology tests show that they were on the medication. In James Holmes' case, the police didn't think to do those. But another
and it got thrown away or whatnot. They're just like, he's
perhaps.
not. And we have 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll just wrap up real quick. Another parallel hypothesis here is that the drug treatments that these people are receiving simply aren't effective. And it gets back to that original question, is the drug effective?
Are we doing the genetic testing, that DNA testing that is showing?
Deal,
that should be mandated. I mean, because people are coming back. My clients are coming back and saying, I found out I have an allergic reaction to the substances that this one would work better than this. And I'm on 2 medications that are, basically harming me more than help. And there's all it is a cotton swab. Most mental health insurances or medical insurances, they cover it. And we're not like mandating it. And that could help a lot with what you're studying.
We definitely need to study this phenomenon more. Really appreciate you bringing us on the show, Tiffany.
Yeah, and it seemed like it went by way too.
Remind the listeners again
of
our websites?
Do your thing.
So you can listeners can get this information at pharmabuse.com, as well as murdermeds.com. And again, thank you so much.
We're gonna have this and everything linked for you guys so you can replay it, and we'll set up after the show another time for you guys to come on, even like sooner than the end of the month, and we'll touch up with this. And
that would be great.
And it is a controversial topic, but we'll get more into it because it needs to be acknowledged. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Lori, for joining us.
Thank you, Tiffany.